Welcome to Marple Whispers, where every story is more than a tale, it's a trap. I'm Sean, and as you listen, remember, Miss Marple taught us one thing. Nothing is ever quite what it seems. In the glittering heart of 1950s London, a Russian count hosts a soirée of secrets, where champagne flows and death lurks in a single glass. When Count Vladimir Petrov collapses, poisoned under the glow of Moscow lights, Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, steps into a web of betrayal, espionage, and hidden jewels. A cryptic note, a stolen microfilm, a statue beneath chandeliers. Who among the elegant guests is the killer? Unravel the mystery where every light hides a shadow. Chapter 1. The Invitation from Afar. In the serene village of Chipping Cleghorn, nestled amid rolling English hills, where the autumn winds carried the faint scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, Miss Jane Marple resided in her modest cottage. The golden hues of sunset filtered through lace curtains, casting a warm glow on the hearth where she sat, her nimble fingers deftly manoeuvring knitting needles through loops of soft wool, crafting a scarf that promised comfort against the encroaching chill. At 80-something, with her fluffy white hair neatly pinned and her blue eyes sharp as ever behind spectacles, Miss Marple embodied the quiet vigilance of one who had long observed the intricacies of human behavior in the most unassuming settings. The village clock struck 4, its chimes echoing softly when the postman's knock disrupted the tranquility. Miss Marple set aside her knitting and rose with deliberate grace, her steps light despite the years. At the door, she accepted a single envelope, its London postmark gleaming under the fading light. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, slightly hurried, the script of her nephew, Raymond West, the acclaimed novelist, whose tales often wove threads of modernism and mystery. Seated once more by the fire, she slit the envelope with a silver letter opener, unfolding the crisp paper with anticipation. "My dear Aunt Jane," it began, "in the whirlwind of London's literary salons, I have encountered a most enigmatic figure. Count Vladimir Petrov, a Russian nobleman who escaped the Bolshevik clutches and now graces Mayfair with his presence. His stories of imperial splendor and shadowy intrigues rival the plots in my own books. This Friday, he hosts an intimate soirée-themed Moscow lights, an evening of reminiscences, rare artifacts, and perhaps a dash of the clandestine. Recalling your unparalleled insight into the puzzles of the human soul, I implore you to join me. The diversion from Chipping Cleghorn's rhythms might invigorate your spirits. Yours affectionately, Raymond." Miss Marple's lips curved into a subtle smile. Raymond, with his flair for the dramatic, seldom grasped the depth of intrigue lurking in village lanes, the whispered scandals over tea, the hidden motives behind a worm neighbour's glance. Yet the name Petrov resonated. She recalled snippets from the Times, a high-profile defection, murmurs of smuggled secrets, and ties to lingering Cold War echoes. What better way to unravel a thread than to pull it gently? She envisioned the soirée not as mere entertainment, but as a stage where characters might reveal their true natures. By evening, her decision was firm. She packed a small valise with essentials, a woolen shawl, her favourite herbal tisane, and a notebook disguised as a recipe collection for jotting observations. The next morning, under a sky streaked with dawn's promise, she boarded the train at the local station. The compartment buzzed with fellow travellers. A harried businessman rifling through papers, a young mother soothing her child, an elderly gentleman dozing with a newspaper folded over his chest. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on each. noting the businessman's furtive glances at his watch, the mother's weary yet protective hold, the gentleman's headline about international tensions. People, she mused silently, are puzzles waiting to be solved, their pieces scattered in plain sight. London's Paddington Station enveloped her in a symphony of steam whistles and hurried footsteps. Raymond awaited on the platform, his tall frame clad in a tweed coat, his face lighting up with genuine delight. "Aunt Jane, you've come! Splendid! The Count will be thrilled. I've sung praises of your deductive prowess, though I framed it as village wisdom to avoid alarming him." As they hailed a taxi, weaving through the throng, Raymond elaborated with enthusiasm. "Petrov's townhouse is a treasure trove. Orthodox icons that whisper of ancient faith, jewels that once adorned Tsarinas, even a samovar etched with imperial eagles. His guests are a mosaic. Diplomats who've danced in forbidden courts, artists capturing lost worlds on canvas, and rumour has it, a prima ballerina whose leaps defy gravity." The cab rattled over cobblestones, the city's lamps igniting one by one against the twilight, evoking distant memories of illustrations in books about far-off lands. Miss Marple peered out, her mind turning to the theme. "Moscow lights," she murmured thoughtfully. "Such brilliance often conceals the deepest shadows. One wonders what tales those lights might illuminate or obscure." The townhouse on Brook Street stood as a beacon, its windows aglow with inviting warmth. As they ascended the steps, the door swung open to reveal Count Vladimir Petrov himself, a commanding presence with a flowing silver beard, eyes like chips of Siberian ice, and a voice resonant with old-world charm. "Miss Marple, Raymond has painted you as a sage of the English countryside. Enter, and let us banish the chill with hospitality." The drawing-room was a vision of opulence, walls draped in deep crimson velvet, mirrors reflecting the flicker of crystal chandeliers, and air scented with exotic incense. Guests mingled in clusters, there conversations, a tapestry of accents and laughter. The Count guided introductions with flourish. First, Elena Ivanovna, his niece, a vision of poised elegance in her 30s, with raven hair cascading in waves and eyes shadowed by unspoken sorrows. "Aunt to me in spirit," Petrov said fondly, though Miss Marple detected a flicker of tension in Elena's smile, as if old grievances simmered beneath. Beside her stood Dr. Sergei Kozlov, a bespectacled physician whose emigration mirrored the Count's, his handshake firm, yet his gaze evasive, darting about the room like a man tallying exits. He engaged in fervent debate with Reginald Hargreaves, a robust British businessman whose ruddy cheeks spoke of hearty meals and sharper dealings in Eastern markets. Lydia Hargreaves, Reginald's wife, moved with ethereal grace in a gown of shimmering emerald, her fair complexion flushed with excitement, or was it nervousness? Her diamond brooch caught the light, a piece too ostentatious for mere accessory, hinting at stories untold. Finally, young Peter Weston, a journalist with tousled hair and a notebook protruding from his pocket, his eyes alight with the hunger of one chasing headlines. "Fascinated by defectors' tales," he confided, though Miss Marple noted how his glances strayed to Elena, laden with more than professional interest. As servants circulated trays of sparkling champagne and delicate caviar on blini, the Count raised his glass in a preliminary toast. "To the lights of Moscow, eternal beacons that pierce even the thickest veil of night. May they illuminate our gathering and ward off the encroaching dark." Miss Marple accepted a flute, sipping sparingly, her senses attuned to the undercurrents, the subtle alliances forming, the unspoken rivalries brewing. In this room of exiles and opportunists, she sensed the prelude to a drama far more compelling than any soirée. Little did the assembly know, the shadows were already lengthening, poised to engulf one of their own in eternal night. Chapter 2. The Fatal Toast. The drawing-room of Count Vladimir Petrov's Mayfair townhouse pulsed with an electric vitality, its crimson drapes absorbing the soft laughter and clinking glasses, while the chandelier's prisms scattered light like fragments of a shattered star. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in a velvet-upholstered armchair near a marble fireplace, appeared the epitome of a benign elderly aunt, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied the sharpness of her gaze. The scarf in her lap grew slowly, each stitch a silent tally of the evening's unfolding drama. She observed the guests with the quiet intensity of one accustomed to deciphering the unspoken in the humdrum exchanges of Chipping Cleghorn's tea circles. Count Petrov held court at the room's centre, his silver beard catching the light as he spun tales of Moscow's vanished grandeur. Opulent balls in the Kremlin's halls, the clatter of troikas racing through snow-dusted streets, and the whispers of revolution that had driven him into exile. His voice, rich with nostalgia, drew the guests like moths to a flame. Elena Ivanovna, his niece, stood close, her elegant frame rigid, her dark eyes flickering with something akin to unease, when Petrov spoke of lost family estates. Miss Marple noted the delicate tremor in Elena's fingers as she clutched her champagne flute, a sign of nerves or perhaps deeper secrets. Dr. Sergei Kozlov, the émigré physician, hovered near the Count, his spectacles glinting as he interjected medical anecdotes with forced levity. His attention, however, strayed repeatedly to Lydia Hargreaves, whose emerald gown seemed to draw his gaze like a lodestone. Lydia, delicate and fair, laughed too brightly at Petrov's stories, her diamond brooch, a gaudy piece for her modest demeanour, sparkling with every movement. Her husband, Reginald Hargreaves, a bullish man with a florid complexion, dominated a corner with booming tales of his trade ventures in Riga and Tallinn. "The East is a gold mine for those with nerve," he declared, though Miss Marple caught the edge in his voice when Petrov mentioned old Russian alliances. Young Peter Weston, the journalist, prowled the edges of the gathering, his notebook a constant companion. His boyish charm masked a predatory alertness, his eyes darting from face to face as if cataloguing potential headlines. He lingered near Eleanor, his questions about Petrov's defection laced with a familiarity that suggested more than professional curiosity. Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. In Chipping Cleghorn, such attentiveness often heralded entanglements of the heart, or purse. As the clock struck midnight, the room's atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Petrov, his face alight with theatrical flourish, clapped his hands for silence. "My friends," he announced, "we have savoured the lights of memory. Now, a final toast to bind us to the future." From a lacquered cabinet, he produced a crystal decanter filled with a pale amber liquid, its label Cyrillic and faded. "A vodka from my homeland," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. "Smuggled through borders at great risk. A taste of the Russia we lost." Servants distributed glasses, the vodka's sharp scent cutting through the room's perfumed air. Miss Marple accepted hers, but set it untouched on a side table, her instincts honed by years of village scandals, warning her to observe, rather than partake. The guests raised their glasses, Petrov's voice ringing out, "To new beginnings under the eternal glow of Moscow's lights." He drained his glass in a single defiant gulp, the others following suit with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Elena sipped delicately, her lips barely touching the rim. Kozlov hesitated, then drank deeply. Lydia's hand shook, spilling a drop, while Reginald tossed his back with a grimace. Peter Weston, ever watchful, drank sparingly, his eyes on the Count. For a moment, the room held its breath, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Petrov's face contorted, his hand flying to his throat. "The lights!" he gasped, his voice a strangled whisper. "They fade!" His tall frame swayed, then crumpled to the Persian rug, the empty glass rolling from his fingers to rest against a gilt table leg. A collective gasp rose, followed by chaos. Dr. Kozlov was the first to react, kneeling beside the Count, his fingers probing for a pulse. "Poison!" he cried, his voice sharp with authority. "Cyanide! I'd wager its scent is unmistakable. Someone call the police." Lydia stifled a scream, clinging to Reginald, who stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. Elena dropped her glass, the crystal shattering on the floor, her eyes wide with horror. Or was it calculation? Peter Weston, notebook forgotten, stared at the scene, his journalist's instinct warring with disbelief. Raymond West, pale and trembling, rushed to Miss Marple's side. "Aunt Jane, what's happening?" Miss Marple's needles lay still in her lap, her mild blue eyes scanning the room with clinical precision. The tray of glasses stood on a sideboard, most untouched save for Petrov's, its rim glistening faintly in the chandelier's glow. "A tragedy, Raymond," she murmured, "but tragedies are rarely accidents." Her mind, sharp as the pins in her bun, catalogued the details. The Count's deliberate choice of vodka, the swiftness of the poison's effect, the guests' varied reactions. In Chipping Cleghorn, she had seen poison used once. A jealous wife, a tainted jar of preserves. But here the stakes felt higher, the motives murkier. Within minutes, the wail of sirens announced the arrival of Inspector Derek Neal of Scotland Yard, a lean man with a bristling moustache and a notebook as worn as his expression. He strode into the room, his presence commanding order. "Nobody leaves," he barked, directing constables to guard the doors. He surveyed the scene. Petrov's body, now covered with a shawl, the scattered glass shards, the untouched drinks. Turning to Raymond, who hovered anxiously, he demanded, "Who's in charge here?" Raymond, regaining composure, gestured to his aunt. "Inspector, this is Miss Jane Marple, my aunt from Chipping Cleghorn. She has a remarkable way with puzzles." Neil's eyebrow arched, his scepticism palpable. "A village spinster. This is a murder, not a parlour game. Still, if you've anything to offer, Miss Marple, I'll hear it later." He turned to the guests, barking orders for statements. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her face serene but her mind racing. The Count's final words, "The lights fade," echoed in her thoughts. Was it a lament or a clue? She recalled a village curate who, in his dying breath, named a flower, pointing to a poisoner's garden. Words, she knew, were never idle in death, as servants were questioned. The butler confirmed the vodka decanter had been locked in Petrov's study until moments before the toast. The glasses, polished and identical, had been arranged by Elena under the Count's direction. Kozlov muttered about cyanide's availability in medical supplies, his voice tight with unease. Lydia, near tears, clutched her brooch as if it were a talisman. Reginald blustered about the Count's enemies. Bolsheviks, no doubt. While Peter Weston scribbled furiously, his earlier charm replaced by a grim determination. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, each stitch anchoring her thoughts. The poison, swift and odorless, save for a faint almond-like trace, suggested premeditation. But who had access? Who had motive? The room, with its opulent relics of a lost empire, seemed to pulse with secrets. Like old Mrs. Harrow's tea party, she thought, recalling a Chipping Cleghorn incident where a single tampered cup had unravelled a web of envy. Here, under the glittering facade of Moscow's remembered lights, a darker truth waited to be exposed. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The morning after Count Vladimir Petrov's collapse draped the Mayfair townhouse in a sombre hush, its opulent interiors dimmed by a grey London sky that seeped through tall windows. The drawing-room, so vibrant with laughter the previous night, now felt like a stage abandoned mid-performance, the crimson drapes heavy with unspoken accusations. Miss Jane Marple sat in the library, a quieter space lined with leather-bound tomes on Russian history and gilded Orthodox icons that glinted faintly in the muted light. Her knitting lay in her lap, a half-finished scarf of soft wool, but her needles were still, her sharp blue eyes absorbing every detail, as Inspector Derek Neal prepared to question the shaken guests. Neal, his moustache bristling with purpose, had transformed the library into an impromptu interrogation room. A constable guarded the door, and a young sergeant scribbled notes at a mahogany desk. The inspector's methodical approach reminded Miss Marple of a Chipping Cleghorn gardener, Mr. Tuttle, who once unearthed a scandal while methodically pruning roses, each cut revealing a hidden thorn. She had been permitted to observe, thanks to Raymond's insistence, though Neal's sidelong glances suggested he viewed her as a quaint curiosity rather than a resource. "Stay quiet, Miss Marple," he'd said brusquely. "This is police work." She nodded demurely, her silence a practiced art, knowing that the quietest corners often yielded the loudest truths. First to face Neal was Elena Ivanovna, the Count's niece, her raven hair pulled tightly back, accentuating the pallor of her face. She sat with the poise of a ballerina, but her hands clasped in her lap betrayed a faint tremor. "Uncle Vladimir was my anchor," she said, her voice low but steady, though her red-rimmed eyes hinted at recent tears. "We fled Moscow together after the war, leaving everything, our home, our legacy. He had enemies, Inspector, old Bolsheviks who never forgave his loyalty to the Tsar, perhaps even agents still hunting him." Neale pressed her on a specific threat. Elena hesitated, then admitted receiving an anonymous letter from Moscow weeks earlier, warning of danger. "I showed it to Uncle. He laughed it off and told me to burn it. I did." Miss Marple's needles twitched slightly. In Chipping Cleghorn, burnt letters often hid motives as surely as locked diaries. Dr. Sergei Kozlov entered next, his spectacles fogging briefly as he adjusted to the room's warmth. His thin frame seemed to shrink under Neela's scrutiny, his fingers fidgeting with a pocket watch. "I was Vladimir's physician in Moscow, and here," he said, "his heart was frail, angina, but this was no natural death. The cyanide's almond-like scent was unmistakable, applied to his glass, not the decanter." Neal leaned forward. "You had access to cyanide, Doctor." Kozlov's eyes darted to the floor. "In my medical kit, yes, for certain treatments, but it's strictly controlled. Besides, I managed some of Vladimir's investments, discreetly. He trusted me." His voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow, reminiscent of a Chipping Cleghorn chemist caught falsifying prescriptions. Reginald Hargreaves strode in with the bluster of a man accustomed to boardrooms, his florid cheeks flushed with indignation. "This is preposterous, Inspector. Vladimir and I were partners. Furs, amber, Baltic trade. Profitable, mind you, and above board." His booming voice filled the room, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the door where his wife, Lydia, waited. Neil probed their relationship. "We dined together often," Hargreaves admitted. "Vladimir was a gentleman, unlike some." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on his clenched fists, recalling a Chipping Cleghorn farmer whose temper had betrayed a hidden debt. Lydia Hargreaves followed, her emerald gown replaced by a subdued grey dress, though the diamond brooch still adorned her collar, its sparkle jarring against her wan complexion. "Vladimir was kind," she said softly, her voice trembling. "He gave me gifts. Small tokens, nothing more." Her fingers brushed the brooch, and Miss Marple wondered if its weight carried more than sentiment. "Reginald knew of our friendship," Lydia added, but her quick glance at the door suggested otherwise. A village parallel sprang to mind. A Chipping Cleghorn widow whose borrowed jewellery had sparked a feud and a theft. Peter Weston, the young journalist, entered with a defiant air, his notebook clutched like a shield. "I was after a story," he admitted, his tone brash but his eyes wary. "Vladimir hinted at secrets, documents stashed from Soviet eyes, maybe names of defectors. I pressed him, sure, but poison, that's not my game." Neil asked about his closeness to Elena. Peter flushed. "We're friends. Vladimir disapproved, thought I was after his wealth. Ridiculous." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. In her village, young men with ambitions often cloaked their motives in charm. As the interviews concluded, Neil invited Miss Marple to join him over tea in the study, a gesture more courteous than genuine. "Motives aplenty," he muttered, stirring sugar into his cup. "Elena's inheritance, Kozlov's financial ties, Hargreaves's business stakes, Lydia's possible indiscretions, Weston's hunger for a scoop. But evidence? Thin." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild. "People, Inspector, are much the same, whether in Mayfair or Chipping Cleghorn. I once knew a woman, Mrs. Elspeth, who poisoned her cousin over a disputed legacy. The method was simple, arsenic in a teacup, but the heart of it was greed." Neil grunted, unconvinced, but her words lingered. A constable interrupted with news. A safe in Petrov's study, concealed behind a portrait of St. Basil's Cathedral, had been forced open. Inside, amid stacks of rubles and a Tsarist medal, lay a single sheet of paper, its ink fresh despite the chaos. Scrawled in Petrov's hand was a cryptic phrase: "The stranger beneath Moscow lights holds the key." Neil frowned, turning the paper over. "What's this nonsense? A code? A person?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. "Perhaps both, Inspector. In my village, riddles often point to truths hidden in plain sight." The library's atmosphere grew heavier as Neil dismissed the guests, ordering them to remain in the townhouse. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze drifting to the icons on the shelves, saints with solemn eyes, watching over secrets. She recalled Petrov's toast, his deliberate choice of vodka, his final, faltering words. "The lights fade," he had said, and she wondered if he had glimpsed his killer in that final moment. The phrase "beneath Moscow lights" tugged at her memory, not from newspapers, but from a travelogue she'd read in Chipping Cleghorn's lending library, describing Moscow's metro stations, their chandeliers blazing like underground constellations. Could the stranger be a meeting point, a code for a clandestine exchange? As she rejoined Raymond in the hall, he whispered, "Aunt Jane, this feels like one of your village mysteries, only grander." She smiled faintly. "No, Raymond, the scale may differ, but the human heart, its jealousies, its greed, remains the same." Her needles clicked once more, each stitch weaving her observations into a pattern only she could yet discern. The townhouse, with its relics of a lost empire, held a truth as elusive as the shadows cast by Moscow's fabled lights. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Fog. The fog that enveloped London the following afternoon was as thick as the secrets cloaking Count Vladimir Petrov's Mayfair townhouse. It curled around the street lamps of Hyde Park, muting their glow to a ghostly shimmer. As Miss Jane Marple walked arm in arm with her nephew, Raymond West. The damp air clung to her woolen shawl, but her mind was clear, sifting through the fragments of the previous night's tragedy. The crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant clop of a horse-drawn cab provided a rhythm to her thoughts, each step stirring memories of Chipping Cleghorn's quieter intrigues, where a misplaced word or glance could unravel a hidden crime. Raymond, his tweed coat speckled with mist, broke the silence. "Aunt Jane, this business with Petrov, it's ghastly. Poison at a toast. It's like something from one of my novels, but I can't make sense of it. Who do you suspect?" His voice held the eager curiosity of a writer chasing a plot twist. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, scanned the fog-shrouded trees. "It's too early for certainties, Raymond, but the Count's choice of that vodka was no whim. He poured it with purpose, as if to challenge someone or to reveal something. That phrase, 'beneath Moscow lights,' haunts me. I recall a book from the Chipping Cleghorn Library describing Moscow's metro, those grand stations lit by chandeliers like underground palaces. Perhaps the stranger is no person, but a place, a rendezvous hidden beneath those lights." Raymond frowned, intrigued. A code, then, but who understood it? They paused by a bench, its wood slick with dew, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the guests' reactions, their glances, their hesitations. "In my village, Raymond, a coded message once appeared in a church hymn book, pointing to a smuggler's cache. Here, the stakes are higher, but the human heart is no different." Back at the townhouse, Inspector Derek Neal's investigation had intensified. His constables had scoured the drawing room, confirming a chilling detail. The cyanide had been applied to the rim of Petrov's glass alone, the decanter itself untainted. "A precise hand," Neal muttered, pacing the library where Miss Marple rejoined him. Someone knew exactly which glass he'd take. His moustache twitched with frustration, and he glanced at her, half expecting another village anecdote. She offered none, her knitting needles clicking softly as she absorbed his words. Neal summoned the guests one by one for further questioning, his tone sharper now, honed by the weight of a murder unsolved. Elena Ivanovna entered first, her elegance undimmed, but her composure fraying. "Uncle Vladimir and I quarrelled recently," she admitted, her voice low. "He opposed my engagement to Peter Weston, called him a fortune hunter sniffing after our family's secrets. But I loved my uncle. Why would I harm him?" Her eyes met Neal's, defiant yet glistening with unshed tears. Miss Marple noted the way Elena's fingers twisted a silk handkerchief, much like a Chipping Cleghorn, seamstress who had confessed to theft under similar distress. Peter Weston followed, his youthful bravado tempered by unease. "I'll admit I pushed Vladimir for details," he said, leaning back in his chair, notebook absent for once. "He hinted at documents, lists of defectors maybe, or Soviet intelligence. I photographed some papers in his study before the toast, but it was just research." Neil's eyes narrowed. "You were in the study alone?" Peter nodded, then hesitated. "Well, Elena came in briefly to fetch a shawl." Miss Marple's needles paused. In her village, a brief visit to a room often masked a deeper purpose. Dr. Sergei Kozlov's interview revealed a new thread. Adjusting his spectacles nervously, he confessed to a personal connection beyond medicine. "I treated Lydia Hargreaves for nerves these past months," he said, his voice tight. "She and Vladimir grew close. Too close, I thought. Gifts, late-night talks. I warned him it could stir trouble with Reginald." Neil pressed him on his whereabouts during the toast. "I stepped out to the hall for my medical bag," Kozlov said. "It was unattended briefly." Miss Marple's mind flickered to a Chipping Cleghorn apothecary, whose unattended bag had once concealed stolen laudanum. Lydia Hargreaves, summoned next, seemed a shadow of her former radiance, her grey dress devoid of the diamond brooch. "Vladimir was a friend," she whispered, her hands clasped tightly. "He gave me small gifts, a brooch, a scarf, because he understood my love for beauty. Reginald knew nothing. He's so consumed by his deals." Her voice broke, and she dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Neil asked about her movements during the toast. "I was near the tray, yes, but only to help serve. I touched nothing." Miss Marple's gaze softened. She recalled a Chipping Cleghorn widow whose tears had masked a calculated betrayal. Reginald Hargreaves stormed in last, his temper barely contained. "This is an outrage, Inspector. Vladimir and I were partners, not rivals. His death ruins my Baltic ventures." Yet his bluster faltered when Neil mentioned the safe's contents, a coded note tying him to Petrov's secrets. "I knew nothing of his intrigues," Hargreaves insisted, but his flushed face suggested otherwise. As the interviews ended, Neil shared a discovery with Miss Marple over a cup of strong tea. "We found traces of almond-scented residue on Petrov's glass. Cyanide, no doubt, but applied so delicately it suggests expertise. And that note, the stranger beneath Moscow lights. It's maddeningly vague." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "In Chipping Cleghorn, a cryptic message in a parish register once led to a hidden will. Here, I suspect the stranger points to a secret Petrov meant to expose or protect." That evening, a constable reported a disturbance. A cloaked figure had been seen slipping out of the townhouse's rear entrance, vanishing into the fog. Neil ordered a watch on all exits, his frustration mounting. Miss Marple, seated by the library's fire, resumed her knitting, her mind weaving a pattern from the day's revelations. Elena's quarrel, Peter's photographs, Kozlov's unattended bag, Lydia's gifts, Reginald's denials, each was a thread, but the design remained elusive. She pondered the Moscow lights anew, the metro's chandeliers, yes, but also the city's statues, bronze figures in stations, silent witnesses to clandestine meetings. Could the stranger be a statue, a code for a drop point? She recalled a Chipping Cleghorn mystery where a garden statue hid stolen jewels. "People hide truths in plain sight," she murmured, her needles clicking like a metronome. As Raymond joined her, his face pale with worry, she offered a gentle smile. "Fear not, dear. The fog hides much, but it also reveals shadows moving where they shouldn't." Her eyes drifted to the window, where the mist pressed against the glass, and she sensed the killer was closer than anyone realized, their motives as tangled as the London streets outside. The townhouse, with its relics of a lost empire, was a stage where every guest played a part, and one, she was certain, had scripted a murder. Chapter 5. The Hidden Jewel. The third day of the investigation dawned with a brittle clarity, the fog lifting to reveal a London sky of pale, unyielding grey. Inside Count Vladimir Petrov's Mayfair townhouse, the air was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for the truth to surface. Stuart. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a quiet counterpoint to the restless pacing of Inspector Derek Neal. The constable's report from the night before, a shadowy figure fleeing into the fog, had heightened the sense of unease, and Neal's sharp commands to his men echoed through the corridors. Yet Miss Marple, perched in her armchair, her scarf lengthening stitch by stitch, remained a picture of serene focus, her eyes missing nothing. Neal, rubbing his temples, approached her with a grudging respect. "Miss Marple, we're at a standstill. The cyanide was on the glass, the safe cracked, that cryptic note, the stranger beneath Moscow lights. I need something concrete." His moustache twitched with frustration, but there was a plea in his eyes. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice gentle but precise. "Inspector, the Count's artifacts may hold answers. In Chipping Cleghorn, a stolen heirloom once revealed a thief's intent. Might we examine his collection?" Neal, intrigued despite himself, agreed, and led her to the study, where relics of Imperial Russia gleamed under the soft light of a single lamp. Among the treasures, icons, jeweled snuff-boxes, a Tsarist samovar, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a Fabergé egg. Its enamel surface a mosaic of sapphire and gold, perched on a velvet cushion. "This," she said, her fingers hovering over its intricate clasp. "It's more than decorative." Neal, skeptical but curious, opened it with care. A faint click revealed a hidden compartment, and within, a tightly wound reel of microfilm. His eyes widened. "Good Lord, what's this?" At Scotland Yard, the microfilm was developed, revealing blueprints labelled Moscow Lights Project. The documents outlined a covert defection network, with names, dates, and, startlingly, Reginald Hargreaves listed as a contact for Baltic operations. Neal's voice was grim. "This could be motive, blackmail, betrayal." Miss Marple nodded, her mind drifting to a Chipping Cleghorn jeweller whose secret ledger exposed a smuggling ring. Secrets, Inspector, are often the deadliest currency. Back at the townhouse, Neal confronted Hargreaves in the library. The businessman's ruddy face turned ashen. "Petrov was cutting me out," he admitted, his voice low. "He claimed I'd been compromised by Soviet agents. I swore it wasn't true, but he wouldn't listen. Murder him? Never. My ventures depended on him." His fists clenched, but his eyes held a flicker of fear, not guilt. Miss Marple, knitting quietly, noted the desperation in his tone, like a Chipping Cleghorn merchant caught in a lie about his debts. Elena Ivanovna was summoned next, her composure fraying like fine silk. "The stranger in the note," she said, her voice taut, "was Uncle Vladimir's code for a double agent within his circle. He feared betrayal, but never named them." Her gaze darted to the door, where Peter Weston lingered. Miss Marple's needles paused. Elena's intensity reminded her of a village schoolteacher who denounced a lover to deflect suspicion. Dr. Sergei Kozlov's interrogation took a darker turn. Neal revealed a vial of cyanide found in his medical kit, its almond-like scent unmistakable. Kozlov's spectacles slipped down his nose. "It's for treating cyanide poisoning. Ironic, yes, but standard in my field." His alibi, however, crumbled. He'd left the drawing room during the toast to retrieve his bag from the hall, unattended for several minutes. Anyone could have tampered with it, he protested, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Miss Marple recalled a Chipping Cleghorn doctor whose unguarded bag had been pilfered for poison. Peter Weston produced a bombshell, a handwritten note from Petrov, found in his study desk. "Beware the physician's hand," it read in Cyrillic script. Neely's eyes narrowed. "Forged?" Peter shook his head. "I found it hours before the toast. Vladimir slipped it to me." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. In her village, a forged letter had once framed an innocent man, but the handwriting here matched Petrov's from the safe's note. Lydia Hargreaves, pale and without her diamond brooch, was questioned last. "Vladimir's gifts were kindnesses," she whispered, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "He saw my love for art, for beauty. Reginald misunderstood." Neil pressed her on her proximity to the tray of glasses. "I only arranged them," she insisted, tears welling. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a Chipping Cleghorn widow whose tears masked a theft. But Lydia's fragility seemed genuine. Or was it an act? As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her knitting a meditative rhythm. She overheard a whispered exchange between Lydia and Elena near the fireplace, their voices low but intense. "Women see what men overlook," she mused, recalling a village scandal where a whispered confidence revealed a betrayal. Elena's sharp glance at Lydia, and Lydia's hurried retreat suggested a rift or a shared secret. Neil joined her, his notebook bulging with scribbles. "The microfilm implicates Hargreaves, but Kozlov's cyanide is damning. Weston's note points to him too, but it could be a plant, and Elena, her inheritance hangs in the balance." Miss Marple nodded, her voice soft. "The glass, Inspector. Its rim was poisoned, not the vodka. Whoever coated it knew Petrov's habits. His favourite glass, perhaps." Neil's eyes lit up. "The butler said Elena handled the tray last." Miss Marple's needles clicked thoughtfully. "Yet consider the Moscow lights. I read once of the metro's statues, bronze figures beneath chandeliers, where spies exchanged secrets. The stranger could be a statue, a meeting point for Petrov's network." Neil frowned. "A statue, that's a stretch." She smiled faintly. "In Chipping Cleghorn, a garden statue hid a stolen locket. Symbols, Inspector, often conceal truths." As evening fell, a constable reported a fresh clue. A smudged fingerprint on the cyanide vial, not yet identified. Neil ordered it sent for analysis, his frustration palpable. Miss Marple's mind turned to the tray of glasses, untouched save for Petrov's, its rim glistening in the chandelier's light. The precision of the act suggested intimacy. Someone who knew the Count's ways. Elena's trembling hands, Kozlov's unattended bag, Lydia's nervous glances, Weston's note, Hargreaves's desperation. Each was a piece of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Raymond entered, his face drawn. "Aunt Jane, this feels like a chess game, and we're losing." She patted his hand. "Patience, dear. In Chipping Cleghorn, a chessboard left out in the vicarage revealed a checkmate plot. The killer's move is already made. We need only see it." Her eyes drifted to the Fabergé egg, its hidden compartment a reminder that the smallest treasures held the greatest secrets. The townhouse, steeped in the ghosts of Moscow's past, whispered of a truth yet to be unveiled, lurking in the shadows of its glittering lights. Chapter 6. Threads Unravelling. The fourth day in Count Vladimir Petrov's Mayfair townhouse crackled, with a tension as taut as a violin string, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The drawing-room, once a stage for glittering revelry, now felt like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. Miss Jane Marple sat in her familiar armchair, her knitting needles moving with the steady precision of a metronome, each stitch weaving her observations into a pattern only she could discern. The scarf in her lap, nearly complete, seemed a metaphor for the case, loose threads slowly forming a coherent whole. Outside, a thin drizzle coated London's streets, casting the townhouse in a muted glow, as if the city itself mourned the Count's untimely end. Inspector Derek Neal, his moustache bristling with determination, gathered the guests in the library, where the scent of old leather and wax polish mingled with the faint tang of suspicion. His eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights, scanned the assembly. Elena Ivanovna, her elegance marred by a strained expression. Dr. Sergei Kozlov, fidgeting with his spectacles. Reginald Hargreaves, his bluster subdued. Lydia Hargreaves, pale and clutching a handkerchief. And Peter Weston, his journalist's bravado replaced by a wary alertness. Miss Marple, invited to observe, sat quietly, her presence as unassuming as a shadow, yet her mind as sharp as the needles in her hands. Neil's voice cut through the silence. "We have evidence. Cyanide on the Count's glass, a cracked safe, a microfilm implicating Mr. Hargreaves, a vial in Dr. Kozlov's kit, and a note warning of the physician. Someone here is lying." His words sparked a flurry of accusations. Peter pointed at Kozlov. "That vial. Convenient, isn't it? And Vladimir's note named you." Kozlov retorted, his voice rising. "You forged it, Weston, to cover your snooping. Or perhaps Hargreaves. His business was crumbling without Vladimir's backing." Reginald's face reddened. "Slander! I'd never stoop to murder." Lydia, trembling, whispered, "Stop this, all of you." Only Elena remained silent, her dark eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mild voice cutting through the chaos. "If I may, Inspector, the poison was on the glass's rim, not the vodka. Who had the opportunity to tamper with it?" Neil, startled by her interjection, nodded grudgingly. "The butler saw Mrs. Hargreaves near the tray last." Lydia gasped, her handkerchief fluttering. "I only arranged the glasses. Vladimir asked me to help." Miss Marple shook her head gently, her eyes gleaming behind her spectacles. "No, Inspector, it's not just the tray, it's the lights, beneath Moscow lights. I've been thinking of the Moscow metro, its stations adorned with chandeliers and statues, where secrets were exchanged in the shadows. The stranger could be a statue, a code for a rendezvous point in Petrov's network." Neil frowned, skeptical but intrigued. "A statue? That's fanciful, Miss Marple." She smiled faintly. In Chipping Cleghorn, a coded note in a hymn book led to a smuggler's lair. Symbols hide truths. The room stilled as her words sank in. Neil pressed on, turning to Elena. "You handled the tray earlier, Miss Ivanovna, and your quarrel with your uncle. Over Weston, wasn't it?" Elena's composure cracked, her voice sharp. "Yes, we argued. He wanted to disinherit me, thought Peter was after our secrets, but I'd never harm him." Peter stepped forward, defensive. "She's telling the truth. Vladimir was paranoid, saw enemies everywhere." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind sifting through the clues. The microfilm's revelations, Kozlov's vial, Weston's note, Lydia's gifts, Hargreaves's desperation. She recalled a Chipping Cleghorn scandal where a poisoned cake at a fete exposed a family feud. Here, The motive felt personal, rooted in betrayal. Her gaze drifted to Elena, whose perfume, a faint almond-like scent, had lingered in the drawing room the night of the murder. It was subtle, easily mistaken for cyanide's odour, yet Eleanor had avoided drinking the vodka. Neil, sensing a breakthrough, ordered a search of the guests' rooms. In Elena's, tucked inside a velvet jewellery box, a constable found a small vial, its contents matching the cyanide scent. Elena's face drained of colour. "That's not mine!" she cried, but her voice faltered. Neil's eyes narrowed. "Explain this, Miss Ivanovna." Miss Marple spoke softly, her tone almost apologetic. "Inspector, consider the perfume. Elena wears a scent with an almond note, masking the cyanide's trace. She was near the tray before the toast, during the distraction of Petrov's stories. She knew his habits, his favourite glass, always the one with the etched eagle. She turned to Elena, her voice gentle but firm. "You coated the rim, didn't you? Like my neighbour's niece in Chipping Cleghorn, who tampered with a teacup over a disputed inheritance." Elena's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. "He betrayed us," she whispered, tears streaming. "After we fled Moscow, he hoarded the family jewels, our legacy, while I struggled. Then he threatened to cut me out for loving Peter, claiming he was a spy. I couldn't lose everything again." The room fell silent, the weight of her confession settling like dust. Neil, stunned, signalled his constable to prepare for an arrest. "You poisoned him to secure your inheritance?" Elena nodded, her voice barely audible. "I slipped the cyanide from Sergei's kit onto the glass. It was so quick. I didn't think it would feel like this." Miss Marple's needles stilled, her heart heavy. She recalled a Chipping Cleghorn girl, driven to theft by desperation, her remorse as genuine as Eleanor's. "Greed and fear," she murmured to Raymond, who stood beside her, pale with shock. "They blind us to the cost of our actions." Neil cleared the room, his voice brisk as he organised Elena's detainment. As the guests dispersed, Kozlov muttered about his stolen vial, Hargreaves about his ruined ventures, and Lydia wept softly, her handkerchief sodden. Peter Weston, notebook in hand, stared at Elena with a mix of grief and betrayal. Miss Marple gathered her knitting, her thoughts lingering on the microfilm. Its secrets, names, dates, a network, suggested Petrov's death was more than a family feud. Had Elena acted alone, or was she a pawn in a larger game? As she and Raymond stepped into the drizzle-soaked street, he shook his head. "Aunt Jane, how did you see it? The perfume? The glass?" She smiled, her shawl drawn tight against the chill. "In Chipping Cleghorn, dear, a woman's scent once betrayed her presence at a theft. Here it was the same, small details, overlooked by all but an old woman's eyes." The townhouse loomed behind them, its windows dark, the Moscow lights of Petrov's stories extinguished. Yet Miss Marple knew some shadows remained, waiting to be illuminated by the relentless glow of truth. Chapter 7. The Final Glow. The fifth day in Count Vladimir Petrov's Mayfair townhouse dawned with a stillness that felt like the calm after a storm, though the undercurrents of unease lingered like the faint drizzle outside. The grand rooms, once alive with the glitter of champagne and the echo of Russian tales, now stood silent, their opulence dimmed by the weight of a solved crime, or so it seemed. Miss Jane Marple sat by the drawing-room's fireplace, her knitting needles crafting the final rows of her woolen scarf, each stitch a quiet affirmation of the truth she had unravelled. Yet her sharp blue eyes, framed by the delicate lines of age, remained vigilant, sensing that the shadows of Moscow's lights had not yet fully dispersed. Inspector Derek Neal, his moustache less bristling now, oversaw the final formalities of Elena Ivanovna's arrest. She had been taken to Scotland Yard. Her confession, a desperate act born of fear and greed, ringing in the ears of those who remained. The other guests released from their enforced confinement prepared to depart, their faces etched with relief tinged with guilt. Dr. Sergei Kozlov packed his medical bag with trembling hands, muttering about his compromised reputation. Reginald Hargreaves, his business prospects in tatters, barked orders at porters to retrieve his luggage. Lydia Hargreaves, her diamond brooch absent, moved like a ghost, her eyes hollow with unspoken regrets. Peter Weston, the journalist, scribbled notes with a fervour that suggested he was already crafting a headline, though his glances toward the door where Eleanor had been led away betrayed a deeper loss. Miss Marple, however, was not ready to close the case in her mind. The microfilm, the cryptic note about the stranger beneath Moscow lights, and the precision of the cyanide's application nagged at her. In Chipping Cleghorn, a solved theft had once revealed a deeper conspiracy when a second clue, a hidden letter, emerged. Here she sensed a similar layering of motives. She rose, her shawl draped elegantly over her shoulders, and approached Neil in the library, where he was reviewing his notes by the light of a green-shaded lamp. "Inspector," she began, her voice soft but carrying the weight of conviction. "Elena's confession explains much, but not all. The microfilm's secrets, names, dates, a defection network, suggest a larger game. Why did Petrov choose that moment, that toast, to risk exposure?" Neil looked up, his skepticism softened by her earlier insight. "You think there's more, Miss Marple?" Elena admitted to the cyanide, the motive, inheritance, betrayal. She nodded, her needles clicking faintly in her hands. "Indeed, but consider the note in the safe. The stranger beneath Moscow lights holds the key." Elena knew of the code, yet her act feels impulsive, driven by personal grievance. The microfilm, however, points to espionage, a world beyond her reach. In Chipping Cleghorn, a poisoned pie at a fete masked a smuggling ring. Here, I wonder if Elena was a tool, not the mastermind. Neil's brow furrowed, but he gestured for her to continue. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the study's artifacts, lingering on the Fabergé egg, its hidden compartment now empty. Petrov was signaling something, she mused. The Moscow lights. I believe they refer to the metro's chandeliers, yes, but also to a specific statue, perhaps one in the Komsomolskaya station, where spies met during the war. The stranger could be a contact or a drop point, known to someone in this room. Neil summoned the remaining guests for a final briefing, his tone brisk but curious. "Miss Marple has a theory," he announced, ignoring their weary glances. "Let's revisit the night of the murder. Who knew of Petrov's plans to reveal the microfilm?" Kozlov shook his head, his spectacles glinting nervously. "I managed his health, not his secrets." Hargreaves blustered. "I told you, he was cutting me out. Thought I was compromised. I knew nothing of microfilms." Lydia, her voice barely audible, said, "He never spoke of such things to me." Peter Weston, however, hesitated, his pen pausing. "He hinted at a revelation, something big. I thought it was just another story." Miss Marple's needles stilled, her gaze settling on Peter. "Mr. Weston, your note, 'Beware the physician's hand,' was it truly from Petrov? Or did you write it to shift suspicion?" Peter flushed, his bravado faltering. "I found it, I swear, in his desk before the toast." She tilted her head, her voice gentle but probing. "Yet you were in the study, photographing documents." In Chipping Cleghorn, a young man forged a letter to protect a lover. Did you know Elena's plan? Peter's eyes widened, but he shook his head vehemently. Neil, sensing a crack, pressed further. "Weston, your photographs, what did they show?" Peter admitted. "Lists, names, coded routes. I thought it was my scoop." Neil exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, who nodded slightly. The microfilm's contents, combined with Peter's actions, suggested he had stumbled into Petrov's secrets, perhaps too deeply. As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered in the study, her fingers brushing the edge of a desk drawer. There, tucked beneath a blotter, was a postcard, overlooked by the police, depicting Moscow's Komsomolskaya station, its chandeliered ceiling glowing above a bronze statue. Scrawled on the back in Petrov's hand were the words, "The stranger awaits." Her heart quickened. It was the final piece. Petrov planned to expose the network, she murmured to Neela, who had joined her. He invited these guests to flush out the traitor. Elena's act was personal, but someone else feared the microfilm's truth. Neil, now fully attentive, ordered the postcard analyzed. Its ink matched Petrov's, its message a deliberate clue. But who? He asked. Miss Marple's eyes softened. Someone who knew the code, who feared exposure. Kozlov, perhaps, with his financial ties to Petrov's secrets. Or Hargreaves, whose Baltic ventures hid darker dealings. In Chipping Cleghorn, a coded note in a vicarage led to a spy. Here, the postcard confirms Petrov's intent. As she prepared to leave with Raymond, the townhouse emptying of its guests, he marveled, "Aunt Jane, you saw what we all missed. The postcard, the statue." She smiled, her scarf now complete, folded neatly in her lap. Human nature, dear, shines brighter than any city light. Petrov's postcard, like a village note, was overlooked by all but an old woman's eyes. The train to Chipping Cleghorn awaited, its lights blurring into the dusk, a reminder that mysteries, like strangers, linger in the glow until truth casts them out.